My name is David Brown. I'm a former Marina City Councilman and a former Marina Coast Water District Board member. And now I am just, having said all that, I'm here to help out on this important water issue. I'd like to welcome all of you, and I'd like to welcome especially the following elected people. Our Marina City Council member, Gail Morton. Raise your hand, Gail. There you are. And I see almost the entire Marina Coast Water District Board is here. Tom Moore, stand up, Tom.
We're not sitting together.
And Peter Lee, I think, is here. Hi, Peter. Matt Zefferman, newly elected. And Jan Schreiner. And by the way, to the four of you, there is an exception in the Brown Act which allows you to actually participate in the program by answering questions, and the Brown Act doesn't apply unless you start talking about other subjects. It's true, check it out. But anyway, I think good. And Ken Nishi is here. I think he's a former Marina City Councilman and Water Board member. Hi, Ken. And Del Rio City Councilperson John Gagliotti is here. Hi, John. And George Riley of the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District, and Molly Evans. And we also have here Eric Tynan of the Castroville Community Service District. There you are. And Norm Groot of the Farm Bureau. And Nancy Isaacson of the Salinas Valley Water Coalition. And this forum tonight is co-sponsored by, it's sponsored by Citizens for Just Water, a Marina group, but also Public Water Now, and the Marina Democratic Club. And so those of you from Public Water Now, raise your hands. It's a nice turnout. And those of you from Citizens for Just Water, me too. And those from the Marina Democratic Club, you can raise your hands twice. Well, that's a good turnout. We sincerely thank you for everything you do. Now, at this time, I'd like to introduce to you a remarkable individual who is an attorney specializing in a complex, highly specialized body of legal knowledge, Mark Del Piero. Mr. Del Piero has served on the Monterey County Board of Supervisors and also for, I believe, 6 years on the California Water Resources Control Board. He has been an adjunct professor at his and my alma mater, Santa Clara University Law School, teaching water law for 9 years. And tonight he is here to talk about groundwater rights and how it relates to the Cal-Am Slant Well Desalination Project. Kathy, could I have the slide? I'd just like to say a few things. Before we begin, for those of you who are not really familiar with this controversy, some people might ask, well, wait a minute, doesn't the desal plant take ocean water? What's this about groundwater? Well, this is a slide that was prepared for our by our Just Water member, Julie Hoffman. And as you can see, although this is not to scale, the slant well is not really in the ocean at any place. It's under the ocean, way under, in the 180-foot aquifer. And so it's drawing groundwater. The 180-foot aquifer, although it has brackish water, it's a mixture of seawater and freshwater. It's connected to the 400-foot aquifer and below. So we're dealing with Cal-Am wanting to take Marina's groundwater. We call this the Salinas Valley water basin. And this is an unproved technology, slant wells. It's experimental. It's never been successfully used anywhere else in the world, I hear. And again, it's to take groundwater. And let me give you some figures. So if Cal-Am has, by the way, that's misleading in one sense, there will be 10 of those pipes, those slant wells. They will be withdrawing 6.4 million gallons per day. And if you divide that into the proportion that's fresh water as opposed to seawater, that's about 8%. That's 500,000 gallons per day. And that works out to an amount of water equal to a cube. Not the total water, the relative amount of fresh water, equal to a cube, 30 feet high, 30 feet wide, and 33 feet long. Bigger than this room. Fresh water, groundwater, every day. At any rate, Mark is here to tell us that CalAm has no water rights in the Salinas Valley groundwater basin, and that should make us wonder why CalAm is proposing to take this water. So Mark, can you take it from here?
Actually, I'm going to do that here. I apologize. Some of you that know me know that I had back surgery a while back, so I apologize for not standing at the podium, but I'm going to do this presentation from the chair, if that's okay. Again, clearly there's nothing on television tonight, right? I mean, for a guy who doesn't collect stamps and focuses on water rights issues, to have a room like this when it's not a bunch of students who are required to be there is the closest thing to an act of God that I've ever seen. First of all, let me thank the sponsors of this event for inviting me to talk tonight. What I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to try and condense what normally takes me a half a semester to teach a bunch of law students into about an hour. And so I want to make this offer to anybody and everybody, so long as it's within the time frame that the sponsors have. If you have questions about what I'm talking about, I'll be happy to answer any question you've got. That hopefully will give you some indication of my belief in regards to what I'm representing. Someone asked me tonight, as I walked in here tonight, who I work for. I don't work for anybody in the desalination business in Monterey County. I am employed generally around the state, oftentimes as an expert witness on the law of California water rights. I'm testifying against the state of California and former Governor Brown in regards to the double tunnels that are proposing to increase appropriations of water from the Delta down to Southern California. I've been engaged by 2 counties, a bunch of farm groups up in the Delta, as well as a number of environmental groups, and that's an ongoing process. I also represent several other public agencies, but nobody in Monterey County that's developing a desal plant, nor have I ever represented anyone in Monterey County representing, developing a desal plant, or talking about developing a desal plant, or even dreaming about developing a desal plant. And I point that out so everyone understands, although I have a clear and distinct bias in regards to my presentation tonight, it ain't because of money, ladies and gentlemen, I can assure you. The law of California groundwater rights is a law that first was created by the California Supreme Court in about 1906, so over 100 years ago. In California, there are really 2 sources of water. Am I speaking close enough to this? There are really 2 sources of water that are subject to what's known as appropriation. And appropriation, folks, is really a legal word used to figure out how much of a limited supply people are entitled to. So if there's a bucket of water and there are 4 people, everybody would be entitled to a quarter of the bucket. And if the bucket keeps recharging because of rainfall and that allocation stuck, everybody would still be entitled to a quarter of the bucket. If the rain came a lot harder than normal and the bucket started to overspill, that bucket and the amount that spills out of the bucket is surplus to the needs of the 4 people who get 1/4 of the bucket apiece. And that surplus water is then available under the state constitution for someone who wants to put that water to beneficial use. Okay? But it's only available to that, they call them junior appropriators. It's only available to junior appropriators as long as it keeps raining. When the heavy rains stop and the water stops spilling, then those senior appropriators, the ones who have the right to a quarter of a bucket per party from the beginning, still get their quarter of a bucket, but the juniors get cut off. That's the law both in terms of surface water rights as well as groundwater rights in the state of California. In Salinas Valley, the water supply that everybody in the city of Marina and everybody in Castroville and everybody in Salinas and all the farmers from Neponset and Mulligan Hill all the way south to Bradley rely upon is a percolated groundwater basin. Now what does that mean? That means that unlike the Carmel Valley, where there's a river and the flow of the river underneath the ground emulates the surface flow. Unlike that Carmel Valley example, the Salinas Valley is not like that. The Salinas Valley, it has a river in it, it's called a percolated groundwater basin. And what that means is that underneath the river, there's no defined channel, subterranean channel of the river. The water that flows in the river, depending upon the season, percolates into the ground and spreads out all over the place. Well, why is that important? The reason it's important is because when the California Supreme Court articulated the law in regards to appropriative rights related to groundwater back in 1906, they made a point of saying that everybody who has a piece of property that overlies a groundwater basin, so sort of like this cup, if you own a piece of ground, say 10 acres, and in the bottom here is some water that you would drill a well into to get a water supply. Everyone whose property overlies that groundwater basin, that body of water that's buried in the ground, is entitled to what's called their correlative right. It's their fair share. That's really what it means. Correlative right is nothing more than a fair share allocation. Except a fair share allocation is only allowed so long as the amount of water collectively taken out by everybody does not exceed what's known as the safe yield. Remember what we were talking about in terms of the bucket, and the first 4 people get a right to the quarter of a bucket apiece. As long as it rains and the bucket overspills, there's not a problem. But if it stops raining and the bucket starts to draw down as those people who have 4 water rights start taking it, that bucket is overdrafted. It's overdrafted. What it means is that you can't service the needs of the senior water rights holders. Okay? The Salinas Valley is a huge groundwater basin, but the Salinas Valley is an overdraft. Why is it an overdraft? Real simple. We take too much water out of it. Is this a new issue? No, it is not. I was born in 1953. I'm 66 as of 2 weeks ago. In 1946, before I was born, in 1946, the Army Corps of Engineers determined that the Salinas Valley was in a groundwater overdraft. It wasn't bad in 1946, but it was clearly an overdraft. What's the consequence of that? Well, the consequence was that subsequent to that determination by the Army Corps of Engineers, over the course of the next decade, the county and a number of property owners, many of whom were close to the coast, and keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, this was when Marina was still an unincorporated community that was really nothing more than a train stop. Many of the property owners along the coast decided that there were 2 problems that they had. One was the encroaching seawater intrusion that they were suffering in their shallow wells, and in those days their wells were oftentimes 60 to 90 feet deep. And the other problem that they were having was flooding, because at that time neither the San Antonio River nor the Nacimiento River, which are the 2 biggest tributaries in Monterey County to the Salinas River, were dammed. And so in major flood events, everything in the lower end of the valley got flooded. In the late 1950s, the county and all of the property owners within what was known as Zone 2A got together and they voted to assess themselves to build the dam. The purpose of the dam at Lake San Antonio was expressly to do two things: control flooding and facilitate the recharge of groundwater into the basin to reverse the seawater intrusion that had been manifesting itself since the Army Corps of Engineers identified it in 1946. What happened? Well, everybody collectively got together and started paying the bill, and they built Lake San Antonio and the dam there. And a few years later, they thought, hell, that's a good idea, we're going to do that again. Much to the chagrin of the Board of Supervisors in San Luis Obispo County, they did it in San Luis Obispo County. And so the County of Monterey was able to capture the water rights in back of Lake Nacimiento. And for those of you that have been reading the news, you know that the homeowners around Lake Nacimiento are now suing the County of Monterey because they say that it releases too much water into the Salinas River for percolation into the Salinas Valley. Why are these two things important? These two things are important because it demonstrates historically that the property owners who have overlying groundwater rights in the Salinas Valley have been working consistently and uniformly since the late 1950s to ensure a remedy, or multiple remedies, to the seawater intrusion problem that presents itself near the coast. Okay? That has gone on now for quite a while with a number of other projects. In the 1990s, there was a project that was developed. You all have seen the purple valves between here and Moss Landing. It's the wastewater reclamation project for agriculture that was originally built by the Monterey Regional Water Pollution Control Agency. They now call it Water One. That project was constructed expressly to provide a supplemental water supply for agriculture in the area that was intruded with seawater, paid for by the farmers. Again, a demonstrative example of the fact that the farmers were concerned about their groundwater supply and the preservation of their groundwater supply, and so they created supplemental supplies in order to offset the pumping, conserve the existing groundwater that existed, and continue to produce agricultural commodities on the farmlands that had been designated for that purpose. Equally true in the late part of the last decade, when they built what's known as the rubber dam. Same deal. Creation of an assessment district expressly for the creation of what's known as the rubber dam down near Spreckles. Primary purpose of that was not flood control at all. The primary purpose of that was percolating water into the ground so as to facilitate agriculture and to inhibit continuing encroachment of seawater into the aquifers. Okay, so why is that important, all of this history? It's important because, again, it demonstrates the property owner's intent to preserve and recharge their groundwater supplies. Now, one of the arguments that has been advanced by the California American Water Company is they're going to salvage water. You just heard from our moderator that the slant wells that were originally represented to be taking, quotes, ocean water, they aren't taking ocean water. They're taking water straight out of the Salinas Valley groundwater basin. Now, I just spent the last 10 minutes explaining to you how the water in the Salinas Valley groundwater basin has been recharged over the better part of 6 decades by the property owners. And oh, I forgot to tell you, you all pay the same assessments because you're all in the same assessment district. You're paying the bill to recharge the aquifers, and you have been since 1958 when they did the first assessment for Lake San Antonio.
Marina.
Pardon me? You, Marina. Yeah. If you live in Cardinal Valley, you can forget what I said. That's your own problem. Okay? But I point this out so that it drives home the relationship between a party that has never put a dime into the recharge of the Salinas Valley and their intent to exploit the aquifers of the Salinas Valley, and the proof that's been demonstrated by the studies done and conducted by the Marina Coast Water District that now proves that they're going to be exploiting freshwater resources. I point this out so everyone gets it. And if I'm not being real clear right now, if someone doesn't understand what I just explained to you, I mean, in a nutshell, what's going on, please raise your hand and I'll do it again, I promise. Okay?
Hacienda was in 57, San Antonio was in 68.
Forgive me, you are absolutely correct. I
And rubber
apologize.
dams percolate water, they divert water right out of the river into the system.
I'm sorry, say again?
Yeah, just 2 points of note for the audience.
Good. And he's correct. I reversed the dates. I apologize. The long and the short of all of this is that in terms of the history of groundwater rights in the Salinas Valley, we have not had an adjudicated basin. This is not an adjudicated basin. What does that mean? That means where someone files a lawsuit to adjudicate the basin. And I passed out earlier, I don't know, and you'll forgive me, I didn't anticipate, frankly, I didn't think this many people were going to show up. I passed out a couple of documents earlier. The first one has a cover sheet on it that shows from the office of the state legislature. Do you have those over there, Kathy?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to bring these along was because one of the arguments that's been advanced is that CalAM's got a letter from a junior attorney who works for the State Water Resources Control Board saying that the doctrine of salvage water is what they're going to rely on. No, not that one. That one. You want to, okay, Kathy, just read the cover, read it. Just read the cover.
It says, Water Rights, Issues and Perspectives, and it's from the Legislative Analyst's Office, presented to Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee, Honorable Fran Pavley, Chair.
Okay, and would you open it up and read what I highlighted in yellow?
Okay, it says, Court System has primary jurisdiction over most groundwater rights determinations.
Why is that important? Because getting a letter from a junior attorney working for the State Water Resources Control Board is like me getting a letter from my mom. The State Water Resources Control Board was created in 1968 by the Port of Cologne Act. And when the Port of Cologne Act was passed and enacted into law, the state legislature did not grant to the State Water Resources Control Board any authority over groundwater in the state. I was actually on the state board for 8 years, but that's okay. They didn't grant it to them. The state board doesn't have authority over percolated groundwater, particularly percolated groundwater in a non-adjudicated basin. Never have. So, hanging your hat on a letter from a junior lawyer, and I point this out now, I've said this 3 times because I want everybody to understand. The state board, the 5 members never voted on this letter. This is an opinion letter from a junior attorney, from an agency that doesn't have any jurisdiction. Okay? That's what the California American Water Company has now spent millions of dollars from the ratepayers of the Monterey Peninsula on. Maybe. Do they have groundwater rights? I can assure you. If they had groundwater rights, they'd have shut me up years ago. Because this has got to be the most miserable experience they can possibly have, having a guy like me who's not getting paid by anybody sit up here and recite chapter and verse the history of groundwater rights in the state of California. But that's the circumstances that we find ourselves in. The Port of Cologne Act never granted that authority to the State Water Board. Moreover, for the people who are really boring, kind of like me, we look around all over the place for a copy of this book. It's called The California Law of Water Rights. Why is it so interesting? Because it's the most comprehensive book on water rights that you could possibly imagine. Unfortunately, it was written in 1953, the year I was born. But It has a 5-paragraph section on the law of salvage water rights. That's it. 5 paragraphs in a book that was published in 1953. That's the total history of case law in regards to the concept of salvage water rights. Well, why is that important? Well, it's important because you got to read the footnotes in these 5 paragraphs. And in these 5 paragraphs, there are 3 cases that are quoted. One was decided in 1896, one was decided in 1889, and the most recent one was decided in 1908. Okay? 1908 was the most recent case handed down related to the doctrine of salvage water rights. And you know why that's significant? Because the California legislature redid the entire water code in 1914. There has not been a case in regards to salvage water rights heard by any court of appeal or the Supreme Court since then. Okay? So, no water rights, millions of dollars spent on a project where they don't have any overlying property, never paid any money into the assessment district, and they're relying on 3 cases that are old, that were decided before my grandfather was born. Okay?
Actually, we're going to allow questions from the audience, 10-minute period after the mark.
And I promise I'll answer every question everybody
I
has.
just want to go with salvage water rights.
Oh, forgive me. Salvage water rights is the argument that Cal-Am's been advancing. They've been telling everybody, if you read the newspaper article in anticipation of this hearing today, that salvage water rights is what Cal-Am is relying on, and it's a reference in the letter from the State Water Resources Control Board junior attorney. Why does a junior attorney from the State Water Resources Control Board reference salvage water rights as a possible way of acquiring water rights in the non-adjudicated Smiths Valley? Because there's no other way to acquire water rights. They had to go back over 100 years to find any kind of case law anywhere, except that case law is now no longer valid because the codes were changed 7 years after the last case was decided. And there's a couple of lawyers in this room who may or may not know much about water rights, but they understand the consequences of the state legislature overturning case decisions that are over 100 years old. So, we'll move on. As part of the percolated groundwater basin that we all rely on in this valley, agriculture has played a major role in developing water recharge facilities. But more recently, the bill has been paid more by urban users. The insidious thing about what's going on here with the slant wells is, as was pointed out at the very beginning, the slant wells are not pulling seawater. They're pulling freshwater out of the aquifer. Why are they not pulling seawater? Because, as was shown in the diagram that was up on the screen, the wells are not being drilled long enough, even a slant well, are not being drilled long enough to get out into the ocean. Why is that? The reason that's the case is because the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, would have objected to wells going out into their primary jurisdiction. So when confronted with that, Cal-Am shortened them up. They shortened them up, and when they shortened them up, they stopped being offshore and started pumping groundwater from the basin. Some people may ask, well, why are they relying on wells anyway? The reason they're relying on wells is not necessarily a scientific decision. It really is largely a political decision. The California Coastal Commission hates desal projects. They hate desal projects. And I point this out because the largest desal project in the western United States is in Carlsbad, It was built by Poseidon Resources Corporation. It's up and fully operational, and they got, the developers ended up having to fight four separate lawsuits prior to getting their permits to build the project. Equally true in terms of the project that Poseidon has been pursuing in Huntington Beach. There are no desalination plants in California, other than one small one in Cambria that's under a building moratorium that relies on the technology being advanced by Callahan. None, except the one in Cambria. And I would, if you've ever been to Cambria, you know you can't compare Cambria to the water demands of the Monterey Peninsula and the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. It's ridiculous. Yet, that's the example that the Coastal Commission staff continues to point out. Why is it that every successful desal project in the state of California and everywhere else in the continental United States, and frankly everywhere else in the world, relies on a screened seawater intake? Because that's the technology that works. And contrary to what everyone tells you about how it'll have an adverse effect on the critters in the ocean, and please understand, I served on the committee that helped establish the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. The technology used for screening seawater intakes is the difference between what it was in the 1980s and what it is now, is the difference between Orville and Wilbur Wright flying on a beach in North Carolina and us sending somebody to the moon. The technology to avoid unintentional impingement of biological organisms into the seawater intakes is massive, and there is no reason in the world at this point, particularly given the minuscule amount of water that would be necessary in order to satisfy the requirements in the Monterey Peninsula, that a seawater intake with an appropriate screen could not be utilized. You need to tell me when to shut up. Okay. I'm going to run through some additional dates for you because, as I said, I apologize. I didn't make enough copies of all of this. There are some things here that you're welcome to, and I think Kathy, if somebody asks, she'll be happy to make copies for you to either take home or receive later. In 1984, why do I bring up the Coastal Commission and their antagonism towards seawater intakes? In 1984, the Board of Supervisors of this county adopted and approved and certified the North Monterey County Local Coastal Plan. What's that? That's the document governing the land use immediately north of the city of Marina. Okay? It was adopted and approved by the California Coastal Commission as well. In that document, there are multiple policies that prohibit both the export of water and also the utilization of water for any purpose other than agriculture in the area immediately north of the city of Marina. Why is that important? Because when the tests were actually done on the so-called slant wells that were supposed to be sucking seawater, that are actually pulling water out of the aquifer, the cones of depression for those wells are so big that they are taking water not simply from the sand plant property. They're pulling water from underneath farmland that belongs to the Ag Land Trust and two other property owners. This is not conjecture. This is from the exhibit that the California American Water Company presented to the California Coastal Commission in direct violation of the policies in their own certified LCP. And they ignored it and went forward with issuing the permit. In 1989, in this county, the Board of Supervisors approved an ordinance that limits who can own a desal plant to public agencies. I actually helped write that ordinance in 1989. We did that for a reason. We understood at the time, and I wish I could tell you I was the smartest guy on the board. I wasn't, but I knew a little bit about water even then. The board collectively knew that in the event a desalination plant was going to be necessary, and we knew it was going to be necessary because There are no more major reservoir sites within Monterey County that are available for development. There are two major reservoir sites that are potentially developable, but you can't develop them because they're in the Los Padres National Forest. There's one on the Arroyo Seco and one down on the Nacimiento, but you can't develop them because federal law prohibits it. We knew at the time in '89 that ultimately a desalination plant was going to be necessary in order to sustain the potable supplies for communities close to the coast, specifically Marina and Castroville. We also knew that in the event that a desal plant was owned by a private entity, it would hold hostage the entire economy of that portion of Monterey County in perpetuity. And so we mandated in that ordinance that the owner of the desal plant had to be a public agency, because public agencies under California law aren't allowed to make a profit. That ordinance is still on the books. Unfortunately, the Board of Supervisors ended up in a big lawsuit with Cal-Am, and they were facing massive penalties because of the misrepresentations that members of the board and their staff made about the availability of water rights that they had. This all took place in the last decade. In the last decade, there was a project that came together where County of Monterey and Cal-Am and a Marina Coast with a different board joined together to pursue a desalination project. Interestingly enough, during the testimony that was presented to the California Public Utilities Commission in regards to that project, Cal-Am's engineers actually admitted on the record they had no groundwater rights. It's in the record of the California Public Utilities Commission. They admitted on the record they had no groundwater rights, and that's why they were doing the so-called joint venture with the county and Marina Coast. That project fell apart for a variety of reasons, and so now we have a situation where Cal-Am is, in spite of the fact they admitted they had no groundwater rights, is attempting to pursue the exploitation of groundwater and groundwater supplies that have been paid for by everybody else. 10 minutes?
Yeah.
I can finish it.
And then questions.
Yeah, sure. A couple of things that you need to be aware of. In 1999, there was a guy named Fred Keeley. Anybody remember Fred Keeley? Good. Everybody, a lot of people remember Fred Keeley. Fred Keeley was our assemblyman. And in 1998, actually, when the law went into effect in 99, but in 98, Fred carried a bill passed the state legislature, signed by Governor Pete Wilson, directing the California Public Utilities Commission to do a comprehensive study to determine the optimal location for a desalination plant to serve the needs of the Monterey Peninsula, because at that time it was clear that Cal-Am was no longer going to be able to take water out of the Carmel River in violation of the law. So Fred carried the bill, good bill, governor signed it, and the CPUC was ordered to go do the study. And they did. They produced the study. 2002 and 2003, they produced the study, and the result of the study said that the optimal location for the construction of a desalination plant to affirmatively address the needs on the Monterey Peninsula, as well as seawater intrusion problems in and around Marina and the Salinas Valley and Moss Landing and even up into the Pajaro Valley, was the location in Moss Landing that used to be called National Frackeries. That's the optimal location pursuant to the independent study done by the California Public Utilities Commission, published in 2002-2003, with the seawater intake. That project didn't go forward because it called for a publicly owned facility, and because Cal-Am didn't have control of the seawater intake. Another public agency ended up with a long-term lease for that, and a partnership with Poseidon Resources. Remember, those are the folks who actually have built a functional desal plant in Carlsbad and Huntington Beach. Some of the people who have done desal before, who actually know what they're doing. But the option of joining with Monterey Peninsula Water Management District was poo-pooed by a variety of folks, including most vigorously by Cal-Am's representatives, and the project never went forward. Building a desal plant on the Monterey Peninsula or for the Monterey Peninsula is not that, it's not that complicated. If you avoid the political pitfalls that Monterey County has had to suffer from for years and years and years. I'm sure I'm going to offend a bunch of people when I say this. It is unbelievably sad that issues like water rights and property rights of people in the Slings Valley and the regulatory process for the construction of a desalination plant that is clearly needed to protect and preserve the health and safety of the residents of Monterey County are tied up in what truly is nothing more than a political fight and a fight over who's going to make profits off of everybody. And I say that with a note of bitterness, because in the time that it's taken, from the time that Cal-Am was told that they could no longer illegally steal water out of the Carmel River by the State Water Resources Control Board in 1995, until now, that's what, 24 years? I mean, you know, my old standard joke is I had hair when that happened. I don't know that I'm going to be able to live another 24 years listening to the lame excuses that are promulgated by a continually new group of Cal-Am executives explaining why they can't do what everybody else in the world seems to be able to do. It's all about profit, ladies and gentlemen. And unfortunately, at this point in time, Cal-Am is attempting to trade the illegal stealing of water out of the Carmel Valley for the new illegal stealing of water out of the non-adjudicated percolated groundwater basin of the Slings Valley. I'll be happy to answer any questions you got. Yes, sir.
Hey, Mark, I have three quick comments. One is that Sand City does have a small desal plant. Secondly, you talked about salvaged water. That's not a very common term. Could you explain precisely what kind of water you're talking about?
Yeah, salvaged water is a concept that existed in the 19th century, and it talked about how it talked about water that might otherwise have been used, but was lost to the management and control of the people or the party that had the water rights. And I just used a term that I hadn't used during the presentation, so I better explain what that is. Management, under the California Constitution, water resources belong collectively to the state. And the right to use water is usufructory. That's a word that you will never hear outside of a discussion on water rights. But usufructory, simple meaning. If you use it, you get to keep it. If you abandon it, then you don't get to keep it. And the concept of salvage water was that in the 1880s, the management of groundwater supplies was basically, you know, unlined ditches. And so oftentimes there were water resources that were being taken out of rivers that were lost. And the courts said that if someone could recover that water without damaging the senior water right holder in the process, those junior appropriators would be entitled to that, quote, salvage water. That's the concept that they're trying to advance. And in fact, it's very interesting to note, of the three cases that were reported regarding salvaged water, none of them related to percolated groundwater. They were all dealing with surface water diversions. So that's what that's all about.
Mark?
Yes. Yes.
That bucket you were talking about at the beginning, it's full of salt water, 95% salt water. So how they divvy that up? And this is a kind of complicated question, but right now,
Well, first of all, let me tell you, It doesn't make any difference if it's salt water or not. There's a statute that prohibits export of water from the groundwater basin. And it went into effect, it was passed by the state legislature, signed by Governor Wilson in 1992, and it's been the law ever since.
We're just gonna abandon that water, we're not gonna use it, no.
Well,
Wait,
you need to understand, you can't abandon water you don't own.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just saying it's not gonna be used, okay?
Okay.
All right. Marina Coast Water District gets 30% of its water, a little more, from the 400-foot aquifer.
Yes.
It gets 70% from the deep aquifer, which has been increasing that percentage is increasing every year. That's a finite supply.
Yes.
Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take stormwater, recycled water, all this water that originates in the overdrafted Salinas Valley groundwater basin, we're gonna give it to Pure Water Monterey, send it to another basin. How's that help Marina? How's that help Castro?
Well, it's not.
It's not. That's right.
You're absolutely correct. It's
So
not.
what's the answer? Because right now, that
The-
Ramco's putting in 7 Castroville's right on top of Marina Coast's current water, long-term water supply, and it's not being addressed.
You know, let me multiple questions, and I'll give you
Sorry
multiple,
about
I'll
that.
give you multiple answers. The failure on the part of the County of Monterey to properly affect the management of groundwater resources in the Salinas Valley over the better part of the last 30 years is legend. Okay, it is unbelievable, the incompetence manifested by the staff of the Monterey County Water Resources Agency. And the best example I can give is, I only brought one copy of it, but I wanted to have it here because, you know, a lot of times I'll say something and someone says, well, where's your proof for that? So I brought all the proof with me tonight. So in the event someone wants to get an argument, I'm going to win. This is a letter dated March 24th, 2010. This is a letter that was demanded by the offices of Michael Stamp from the County of Monterey when the county was representing that it had groundwater rights in order to facilitate not the current desal project, but the last desal project. And they demanded to know, same thing I've been demanding of Cal-Am, where's your proof that you own any groundwater rights? And after 3 really nasty letters back and forth, this was the response that the Monterey County Water Resources Agency sent pursuant to a public records request. I quote, "Further, the Monterey County Water Resources Agency intends to acquire an easement, including rights to groundwater, from the necessary property owners to install the desalination wells. These rights have not yet been perfected to date, hence no records can be produced." This is in 2010 when the county had already gone to the CPUC and represented it had hundreds of acre-feet of water available for the desal project. It was not lie. Sorry, my voice went up. It was not lie. And here's the proof. So, as I point this out so that everyone understands, the county has no groundwater rights. The groundwater rights that exist in the Salinas Valley belong to 2 parties: senior overlying groundwater rights holders, farmland owners, and the municipalities that have senior appropriative rights, one of which it happens to be the Marina Coast Water District. Castroville's one of them as well. Now, as to the contamination in the aquifer, well, that's not something I can cure. Contamination in an aquifer is a violation of the state's water quality laws, and you can take affirmative action against people for intentionally contaminating or even negligently contaminating an aquifer, but nobody's done that. Nobody's done that. But that's not an excuse for Cal-Am to exacerbate the seawater intrusion into the aquifer at the expense of all the senior water rights holders. You see, senior water rights holders among themselves can step on each other's shoes, but Cal-Am as a junior appropriator is allowed to even get in the game. And that's the point. Ultimately, there will be a groundwater management plan adopted for the Salinas Valley. And the groundwater management plan is pursuant to, it's called SGMA. It's a package of bills that was passed in 2014 that mandates that all counties with adversely affected aquifers come up with a comprehensive groundwater management plan. And the groundwater management plan requirements ultimately mandate that the basin be eliminated. If it's an overdraft, the overdraft to be cured, and the basin comes into balance. That's essentially the mandate. But the thing about SGMA and the legislation is it also says that nothing in that legislation shall be construed under any circumstances as compromising the senior water rights holders within the basin. Remember, the farmers and the senior water rights holders of the municipalities. Farmers and existing communities. Cal-Am's not one of those two. Yes, sir.
Art,
Yes, sir.
I got a question here, just to back it up a little bit, maybe sort of look at the bigger picture here for maybe some folks in the room that don't get it. I don't remember it. Is that when Cal-Am came in with their slant well in the first place to do the drilling that they were going to do, they got the okay to go ahead and do that from the CPUC because they were going to drill down under the ocean and suck the ocean water down through the sand. That was the whole concept.
That was the concept.
Wasn't that the concept?
Yeah.
Then at what point did that concept fall apart?
I suspect I don't know exactly, but I suspect sometime around the fact that NOAA and Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary would have mandated permit.
So wait a second. They went in there and they got the approval to do that, but they didn't have a permit from NOAA? They didn't have an okay from NOAA?
Well, let me put this in context.
Yeah.
Say you own a lot up in Hidden Hills with a hell of a view of the bay.
Right.
And I decide I really like that lot, and I go down to the county of Monterey and I pay my money and I get a building permit. And if you don't like it, I'm gonna start building on your lot. And then if I've got enough money in the bank, we can get everything tied up for years and you're screwed. That's essentially what's going on here. Normally when you build a water project, and I've been involved in a few, you demonstrate to whoever the regulator is that you have water rights before you start wasting people's money. In this county, if you drill a big municipal well, they make you do an environmental impact report before you put a hole in the ground. That's not what's happened here. This is what I'm talking about, where politics is overcoming science, it's overcoming environmental protection, it's overcoming existing legal groundwater rights. This is where the Coastal Commission doesn't want seawater intake, so they will do anything they can, and it makes no difference who in the process is hurt in order to make sure there's no seawater intake used. And if it sounds like I'm beating up on the Coastal Commission, they deserve it, because I sat in a meeting where their assistant executive director lied to the commission and they went forward with a vote. And if somebody wants to know about particulars of that, I can document that in a newspaper article.
Okay, so just to get it correct then, so the CPUC overrode the Coastal Commission?
No, California, that's the other insidious part about this. California Public Utilities Commission doesn't grant water rights. The State Water Resources Control Board doesn't grant water rights. Okay, the Coastal Commission doesn't grant water rights. The only parties that can grant percolated groundwater rights in a non-adjudicated basin is the Superior Court. Remember that document that I had her read at the very beginning? This is a situation where they're running around trying to get permits from everybody who doesn't have jurisdiction over the subject matter. And it's been going on for years. And millions of dollars keep being approved by the California Public Utilities Commission without any proof there's an actual supply to be used as feed water for the desal project. And you can't keep lying and saying, oh, we're pumping seawater, when every scientist that's ever taken a look at this, except the engineers being paid by Cal-Am, are telling you something different. Yes, ma'am.
So what is our recourse, since they're all lying and they're giving permits that they should not be giving? So what are we going to do now?
But their remedies are, you have a Marina Coast Water District Board of Directors, almost, I think you've got a majority here, if not all are here, they get it. I can assure you, to a person, they get it, they understand the risk that your supply is being put to. You have a city council that gets it. They understand the risk that your water supply is being put to, and so it doesn't appear that there's some unstated reason why this is all going on. Let me state the reason.
Money.
Of course. This is all about the California American Water Company having a long-term plan to be the sole source of water for every city on the Monterey Peninsula, including Marina. And the way they do that is by compromising your freshwater rights in the Salinas Valley by inducing seawater intrusion for a desal plant that's not pulling in seawater. It's exacerbating the contamination of seawater into your fresh aquifer.
So do we have a lawsuit?
I don't represent anybody in Monterey County, and I don't sue anybody.
Tonight was billed as an update on water rights.
Yes, ma'am.
But you've got this crowd here, and there's been a tremendous amount of work done with appearances on the political side of going to the meetings, up to San Francisco, down to the Could we have a short update so everybody can walk away knowing where we stand with the political fight that Marina's been involved in?
I'm not
I know it
prepared
didn't
to
come
talk.
from you
Yes, ma'am.
necessarily, but they're in the room.
None of the water coming to the desal comes from Marina Coast water supply. Marina Coast gets all of its supply from the 400 and the deep.
Okay, let me stop right there, so everybody understands.
Not a single well close to that plant.
Let me explain to everybody in the room. The non-engineering answer to that is it doesn't make a damn bit of
I
difference.
understand it.
Because under California water rights law that's been in existence since 1906, the law does not differentiate between aquifers.
I
That's an
understand that.
engineering
That's not
decision.
their local water supply.
Mark, just a second.
One more question.
This lady has a great question.
And I'll be done.
And is there somebody in the room that can respond to
I don't
her
know.
question?
Well,
Please, that's why we came.
my understanding is that the Marina Coast Water District and the City of Marina have standing and have that option, and they know they have that option, but I'm not one to speak for either the City of Marina or the Marina Coast Water District, but I believe it's probably being discussed, but it may not be the time to do it right now. In any event, Mark, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and your expertise. And Mark has told us about the legal aspect and more of the proposed Cal-Am slant well. And now, one of those aspects is about so-called appropriative water rights Cal-Am claims, but they can't have it really once there's a lawsuit unless they can show there's no harm. And here we have Keith Vander Motten, the general manager of the Marina Coast Water District, to show us the science, the engineering, about how what is proposed will do harm.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here tonight. It sounds like you probably want me to skip right past this and talk about other things, but I will go through this first if you will bear with me on this. So I'm here tonight to really talk about groundwater sustainability and the use of an aerial electromagnetic survey that we did that really helped us to better understand the basin and specifically to better understand the impacts of the Cal-Am project. So that's what I wanted to at least share with you tonight. To give you a little bit of background, these maps right here are what are in Cal-Am's FEIR for their project. And this is what is being displayed as the baseline of the basin here. So the 180 aquifer, this is being said to be really all intruded, the 400-foot aquifer. This is the story that's being told, that this is really what the basin looks like, that all of this is intruded and you don't need to look too close because if we do more damage, don't worry about it kind of thing. But I wanted to point out also along these maps, I put this black line here, because south of the Salinas River, and really the area that Marina Coast is mostly interested in, these maps were derived with very, very little information south of the Salinas River. Very, very little information. In fact, a lot of the information we were gathering didn't jive with these maps. It was very inconsistent, which made us believed that we needed to do more to understand what was going on. I also wanted to state that also, even though some of the information in this maps are in dispute, what's not in dispute is we do have a seawater intrusion problem. We know that due to overpumping. But that's exactly what the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is supposed to be addressing, and that is something that we're working on right now. This is an image of our AEM study that we had just performed. And it's animated here. And what we're able to do with the data in this study is we're able to look at the geology, we're able to look at the water quality. We flew this entire area with a helicopter, and we took basically an MRI of the groundwater. And in this particular case, you can filter it down to water. In this case, that's 3,000 TDS or less, which is the standard by the basin plan as sources of drinking water. And we can even drill down into the different aquifers. So we have the dune sand aquifer here shown, the upper 180, the lower 180, the 400-foot aquifer. And I wanted to show this as an example of the tremendous amount of information that we were able to get from this survey. You know, traditionally you have wells here and there, and you're really trying to guess what's in between. And now we have this study that gives us a tremendous amount of additional information. In addition, you can take this information, do cross-cutting across the basin, and get really drilled down in different areas to understand what is going on with hydrogeology. How is the water flowing? Where are the aquatards? Those sorts of things that are very important to understand. What are going to be the impacts if you pump this area? I'd like to point out, because I think a lot of people don't really understand what goes into this, it is not just flying the area with a helicopter and getting an MRI. There's actually an equal amount of work matching this information up with studies that exist. In this particular case, this is a Kennedy-Jenks study done in 2004 by the Monterey County Water Resources Agency that we are able to overlay the lithology over the AEM project area, as well as gather the water quality and lithology of hundreds of wells that we actually match up with AEM data. So this is high quality data that's been matched up in ground truth. And there's a lot of criticism that I've heard about people saying that this doesn't match the real world. I can guarantee you it does. And so these are static images of what you just saw, where we saw the sources of drinking water in the dune sand, the sources of water in the 180, and the sources of the water in the 400-foot aquifer. And I want to point out, south of the Salinas River, does this look anything like those baseline maps that we started looking at? No, it does not. And so what we know from the AEM and what we've learned from that is that south of the Salinas River is really unique, hydrogeologically speaking. There is source of recharge going on south of the river. We know that there's interconnectivity between these dune sand aquifer, the 180, and the lower 400. And we know that that dune sand aquifer is important for a couple of different reasons. The dune sand flows towards the ocean and creates a seawater barrier, but percolates down into the lower 180 and into the 400. Now, we don't pump the dune sand aquifer at the coast. That would be a mistake. But we do use that water when it eventually makes its way further inland, which is where our wells are. And as Eric had pointed out, yes, we do pump water from the lower 180, the 400, and the deep aquifer. All of these aquifers are important to protect because they all live together. And the greatest challenge that we're going to have moving forward is really from a SGMA, from a Sustainable Groundwater Management Act standpoint, is how do we manage this dynamic basin? Because we've shown it has value. There's water there. We need to protect and augment that if we possibly can. I wanted to kind of tie this to the CalAm FEIR. This line, it's kind of hard to see here, is what they predict as their capture zone from their project. If you overlay that on the results from the AEM, you see clearly that that's going to be extracting water that's a source of drinking water from the dune sand aquifer. I wanted to actually caveat this as well because this capture zone is the smallest possible capture zone you could have because it's based on what's called a landward gradient of flow. It is assuming that the groundwater is all flowing inland, but there's data that shows that actually the opposite is true, and when you do that, this capture zone goes exponentially out into the aquifer. But for the sake of this, you don't even need to know that, just to show that even the smallest capture zone is going to capture the water. This is the same imagery when we look at the 180. So the capture zone's a little bit different there in terms of how it's shaped, but it still has the same general impact. I wanted to back up 2 slides here because I forgot to point out something very important. The blue area here, we did not fly over the city of Marina. We could not fly over an urban area. And so I wanted to point out that just because it's not blue here, it's blue entirely around the city of Marina. And so in a future study, that will be something we can look at, but you can be assured that that's most likely all blue there as well. So I just showed you the capture zone areas. But what's important to also know is that the water that comes into the basin isn't just what's in the capture zone. That pumping depression from those wells causes seawater to be pulled in and around the capture zone as well. So this plant is going to capture water here, but there's seawater that's going to come around as well. It's not going to capture all of the water that it pulls into the basin. If that's not bad enough, the size of this project should concern you. This project it's undisputed that its wells pull entirely from the coastal groundwater aquifers. We've covered that. It's in the FEIR. It's not a hidden fact. It says it's going to put the wells in the aquifer and pull it out of the aquifer. So the supply for this project is groundwater and seawater that it pulls into the aquifer to then pump out. So it wants to pull seawater in. And the amount of extraction for the plant that's being approved right now, the 6.4 MGD plant, to produce 6.4 MGD of finished water, you have to extract over 15,000 acre-feet of water out of the basin. If you don't know how much water that is, that's basically the entire city of Salinas, right on the coast. The place where we're not going to put our wells. We wouldn't put our wells on the coast, but that's what we're proposing to do. We want to basically take the city of Salinas, put it on the coast, put all our wells, and concentrate our pumping right there. And why is this important to us? This is Marina Coast Urban Water Management Plan. This is a document, it's a public document. We do it every 5 years. Something that was available to the FEIR, something that really wasn't even looked at when they did their modeling because they projected Marina Coast pumping somewhere down here. Never really looked at what our long-term needs are. But you can see that it's almost entirely groundwater dependent. And when I say groundwater dependent, it's not just what exists today, but we're actively looking at recharge projects and augmentation that all require that basin to be healthy. We cannot utilize a basin that's intruded by seawater. These are all the customers that are going to be impacted by that. It's not just the city of Marina. These are all the jurisdictions that Marina Coast serves. These are the people that we promise to provide a sustainable groundwater and water supply source for. There are 2 things that we are actively working on right now to make sure that we can meet that promise. The groundwater sustainability plans is one, and I just want to talk about that a little bit, as well as our groundwater augmentation projects as well. As Eric had pointed out, we can't just sit around and do nothing. There's actively wells going in the deep aquifer and other places. And so what are we doing about that? And I think that's what you're going to see here. So the sustainability plans, we are an exclusive GSA, a groundwater sustainability agency recognized by the Department of Water Resources. When you ask what we're doing, this is one of the many things we're doing to try to protect the groundwater. We're working with the Salinas Valley Basin GSA to put together groundwater sustainability plans to ensure that we have the proper management actions in place to reach the goals of SGMA, which would be that we won't be inducing seawater intrusion by 2040 is the target date, and if we can do it sooner, that would be great. The other part of this, and I think probably equally if not more important, is what are we doing to augment our supplies? We have just finished a major part of the construction of our regional urban water augmentation project. It's a recycled water project that reduces the amount of water we need to pump out from the groundwater for irrigation purposes. But we're already working on the second phase of that in preliminary design to look at how we might use that water to inject in the basin. We've also been working with the city of Marina that have stormwater percolation basins throughout the city, and we're identifying ways we might be able to expand the amount of stormwater we capture in that percolate into the basin. We've done multiple studies on our Armstrong Ranch project about how we might capture stormwater there. What is really unique is that the dune sand aquifer underneath that property as we talked about, naturally already flows, creates a barrier and percolates back in. So we can take advantage of the natural hydrogeology and the property there to percolate additional water into the ground. And then I think water conservation, we haven't talked about that much, but for the last 30 years, there's been billions of gallons that the Marina Coast customers have saved that sits in the groundwater right now that isn't available for CalM or anybody else to just come and take just because we saved it. And we certainly don't want to ruin it.
And so we've got 5, basically.
I'm almost wrapped up here.
Okay, and then after that, we'll allow 5 minutes for questions.
Absolutely. I just actually wanted to leave you with one final thought, because I know we've talked about a lot of issues with that project, but I think one of the things that we've been trying to promote, and this goes into what are we doing about this, I still think we need to find a solution. I mean, this isn't about just trying to stop progress. I mean, we need to find solutions. And one of the solutions that has been presented is expansion of pure water Monterey. It was something that was brought before the CPUC. It was something that I don't think really got vetted the way it should have been. But I think there's studies that show that really truly could provide the supply needed for at least the next 20 years, if not more, especially given the massive reduction in the CalAM system over the last several years. This is something we need to be focused on and working on as a region. This right here, this is the answer, at least an answer.
Can you just give the people in this room, because I'm sure there's a lot of folks in here that have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay.
The Pure Water Monterey project doesn't mean anything.
Absolutely, thank you.
Just give us maybe, 3 or 4 minutes on that. Just give us an update.
Why the roads got chewed up for like 2 months.
Pardon me?
That's why the roads in Marina got chewed up for like
Whatever,
2 months.
that's
Yeah, the Pure Water Monterey project, it's a project really spearheaded by Monterey One Water. They are the ones that run the wastewater treatment facility. And they've developed the treatment process to advance treat wastewater to the point where it can be injected into the basin and used as a potable source of water. So it's virtually the same technology, if you will, as ocean desal. I mean, it's a desalination process that allows that water then to be pumped back into the basin. Marina Coast was part of that project because we partnered with Monterey One Water to get that pipeline that tore up the roads that also benefits our irrigation customers. That project, currently, that phase of the project was about 3,500 acre-feet per year, but Monterey One Water has put out a preliminary 30% design report that says they can expand that by another 2,250 acre-feet per year. So that's another 2,250 acre-feet that's already could be treated and put into the basin that CalAM pulls water out of to the benefit of their customers. So that's really what the Pure Water Monterey expansion project is. It's a project that's already underway. The technology is already there. Now we just want to look at trying to expand it and do more of that. Yes.
So, can you say anything about the lawsuit that Marina Coast and Marina have filed, even the fact that it's filed? And will the Supreme Court accept that? What's the likelihood of them turning it down or accepting it?
It's not a lawsuit.
Well, I got to be careful about saying too much about ongoing litigation, but yes, there is ongoing litigation as far as we are trying to fight the decision because we believe that it didn't follow CEQA. There were other issues, and yes, it's currently before the Supreme Court because that is the appellate body for the CPUC. As far as the odds of them taking it, obviously we hope they're pretty good, especially since it's the only body that deals with appellate decisions for the CPUC, so it's not the typical Supreme Court type case where the odds are very low.
I love your Martin Pittman.
Yeah, he probably knows a lot better being an attorney.
I asked Mark this question, I still think I got, no, it's for you, but how is taking water in the critically overdrafted Salinas Basin, cleaning it up, putting it in the Seaside Basin to pump to CalAM's customers, helping North County, Marina, Ward County? I mean, that's helping CalAM.
It's all that water that would have recharged
Why isn't it
the
staying here?
seawater and
One at a time,
percolated, non-adjudicated basin,
So
right?
as far as Pure Water Monterey, the water is wastewater that comes from the peninsula, comes from all over, and is water that's going out to the ocean untreated, that's now being treated, put in the basin. In fact, there's 6,000 acre feet here still being untreated going out to the ocean, so we should be looking at treating that
You can't
too.
use that in Marina?
Absolutely. In fact, that's, like I said, and some of our preliminary design is looking at that. I hope we can start on something soon, in fact. And we do know, and I'll get to your question here too, because I'm not sure I'm quite in it. But we also know that Marina, as a community, is going to be producing a lot more wastewater as it grows. And so we've already looked at that as well, and believe that if we tap all of the resource as well as the stormwater, that we would have a sustainable supply. And I think also we do need to keep in mind Castroville and its limitations, and that needs to come into the equation as well. 700 acre-feet per year, is that something like that? So yes, I think we need to be looking at that as well.
Our trucks don't pump 7 Castrovilles per night.
And I think that you're right. I think depending on the deep aquifer and saying, let's just depend on that and close our eyes is not the way to go.
So my understanding about where that CPUC process in the Supreme Court is that you asked the CPUC to reconsider their decision, and that the Supreme Court said, well, we're not going to take it, or we're not going to decide to take it or not until we hear from the PUC. And then you talked about the 1989 ordinance and the case between the county and there was a recent ruling that the PUC had to unredact some information related to the sealed information from 5 years ago.
Yep.
My question to both of you is there any time limit for the PUC to respond? Do we sit around and twiddle their thumbs, or when do we get? How long can the PUC just not do anything?
Look, let me. In less than 2 minutes, I'll try and answer that question. The California Public Utilities Commission has never processed a permit for a desalination plant in its history until this one. Okay? The reason that's important is because their staff was not skilled in dealing with the CEQA issues, with the water rights issues, with the issues that are normally raised as part of a local land use process. Those guys didn't know what a certified local coastal plan was. So the responsibility falling on the CPUC instead of the county of Monterey, which is where it normally would have gone, or the city of Salinas, or pardon the city of Marina, where it normally would have gone with a normal CEQA process and a normal EIR, like any other use permit, is decidedly, unbelievably inappropriate. But that's what we got. And so that's why challenges to the CPUC decisions are going straight to the California Supreme Court, because the CPUC is a creature of the state constitution, and the appeal doesn't go to a normal superior court or a court of appeals, it goes straight to the Supreme Court. My bet, after the CPUC makes a decision as to whether or not it will reconsider, my bet is the California Supreme Court's going to take this up. And you know why? Because those folks sitting on the California Supreme Court never get a juicy case like this.
We have time for one more question, and there's a gentleman back there who's had his hand up for about 20 minutes. So do you have a question you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I had a couple other questions, but I want to keep it to Keith's presentation here. You mentioned the sand dune aquifer. Is that documented on Bulletin 118? Is that a legitimately recognized aquifer within the state of California's, water board and DWR?
The dune sand aquifer is, if you know Bulletin 118, they are surface type basins. So Monterey sub-basin is a Bulletin 118 basin. Within that basin are the various layers of aquifers. So Bulletin 118 doesn't identify aquifers, it identifies sub-basins. And there are several sub-basins within the Salinas Valley.
But is the Monterey Basin kind of somewhat considered the 18400, an extension of it?
The Monterey sub-basin has the 180 and 400 aquifers within it. So the same, I guess that's where the 180-400 derived its name originally. Those same aquifers do pass through, but as I kind of pointed out, I think hydrogeologically speaking, there are definitely a lot more complexities than saying that what's happening in the 180-400 up there is the same as the 180-400 down below.
Thank you. One additional thing you need to know, the Regional Water Quality Control Board in 2012, and then subsequently the State Water Resources Control Board have identified that aquifer, or that basin, that you all are talking about as a potable water supply. All of it.
But Sigma only recognizes Bulletin 118, so that's the map that's being used.
Sigma is required to recognize all certified and/or approved state water plans, including the inland plan that's done by the Regional Water Quality Control Board and subsequently adopted by the state board.
Okay, thank you.
Dan, please.
I have an important question.
I will, there's time to do that.
Just a second, Dan.
This isn't a church, but we are going to pass around the basket later.
I have a
Break the
comment
checkbook
that
out.
I'd like to make.
Now, I think we're going to have to move on. At this point, Julie Hoffman, who is the co-founder of Citizens for Just Water, will now explain our current Citizens Initiative. Oh, and let's everybody give a big hand to Mr. Van.
Well, the question was asked, what can we do about this? And you're probably all wondering what that might be to stop this project after listening to our speakers tonight.
Closer.
We have an opportunity to sign a letter. We have them over here alongside the table. We're going to go to our local agencies and governing bodies, 2 state politicians, our congressmen, and 3 state agencies. I want to thank Hans Ankoa.
Microphone.
Pointing toward your mouth.
Okay. But I do want to thank Hans Ankoa for all the work that he did, the hours of putting together the petition online. So that is also available. We have these little yellow cards in the back. You can pick these up. They work with most smartphones, and the web address for the petition is on it as well. If you want to take these home, spread them around to family, friends, coworkers, let them know what's going on so that they can get this petition signed and out to the people that are making decisions.
Just out of curiosity, what is that petition asking them?
I'm getting to that. So we have an ask in our petition, and basically what we're asking is to start pushing for this recycled water project for the expansion. Because what's happening is that this is an affordable, low-hanging fruit project that we could get out and get started. Unfortunately, even though this is an affordable solution, it hasn't been given much traction. And we really need to get, within the next few months, I think 6 months is the timeline here, we really need to get our electeds and our decision makers to push this project forward and make it happen. You know, I also wanted to tell, I know we've asked people to sign petitions in the past, and there's always the question, does this really make a difference? And we have done a few letter writing campaigns in the past, and they have moved the dial a little bit. It gets the word out there, so don't put off your opportunity tonight to let people know about it.
And this is the petition go to?
The petition that is listed on there, I don't have the specific names in front of me.
Which boards or agencies?
Yes, mostly, boy, now I'm blank because I have them on the spot, but it is written down over there if you want to go look at it. But, yeah, it's going to be mostly our local people. Yes? Do you have a comment?
I have a comment. Are you talking to me, Julie?
Yes.
So I know everybody's asking about what is happening in the legal venues. And the point of this meeting is not for the public to rely on what's going to happen in the political venues. Our speakers, Mark in particular, said this is a political-driven process. And so the politics of it are within your control. And so Julie is asking you to sign a petition, but all of you need to be talking to your city council members in our surrounding jurisdictions. I serve on Marina City Council. We're trying to protect our water. We're also trying very hard to cooperate with the other jurisdictions that are dependent on CalAM's water to come up with a solution to make sure there's water. We heard from Castroville. Castroville needs water. It is not Marina's intention to stop people from having secure water. We also want to protect ours. So I'm glad we have city council from Delray Oaks that uses CalAM waters, somebody from Seaside. It's important for your cities to get as informed as the public is about what the cost of this project is, what the cost is going to be when it's passed on to your ratepayers and you personally, and what the alternatives are that Keith Vandermont is trying to explain, Paul Stiotti tries to explain, to say it's much less costly. but it's going to take all of our jurisdictions to cooperate, to come together, to move that pure water project forward with supplemental water, to work with MCWD for short-term water. And in the interim, we're able, as science continues to progress, and we're able to put some things in place, we're going to be able to find a long-term regional solution that does not harm anybody. That's the voice we're asking you to get out there in every venue, in your neighborhoods, any place you have a chance to talk. So, City of Marina thanks you for being here.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Councilmember Morton, very much. And thank you all for coming tonight. We are still passing the basket around so that we can have more of these forums, some of them in different cities. And in mid-March, Public Water Now, Citizens for Just Water, and the Marina Democratic Club will be hosting another forum in Monterey, this one on recycled water and regional water supplies that are the solutions at our fingertips. So good night, everybody. Thanks again for coming.